40 years ago, I contracted tuberculosis. 40 years ago, I spent 6 months of near isolation in an Edwardian sanatorium in southern England. 40 years ago, I was discharged into a world that had passed me by, ostracized by many of those near and dear, and confronted by an employer who cruelly considered me damaged goods and was unwilling to re-engage me. 40 years ago was the start of a roller coaster of events that uprooted my life and propelled me towards a future in Asia and eventually to Australia. 14 months ago, I put together a book to tell my story. Now, you probably wonder how I can remember what happened to me 40 years ago when I've already forgotten what I had for lunch yesterday. The answer, of course, is that you remember events that have impact on your life. Guys, can you remember the name of your first girlfriend and the cinema movie you took her to? I can. Her name was Anne, and the movie was The Fall of the Roman Empire. She had real impact, but I don't think we'll go there this evening. Let's get back to the book. It has an intriguing title that took me weeks to decide upon. A Breathless Odyssey. This is it. Breathless because while I was in the sanatorium, I had half of my right lung surgically removed. An odyssey because this was the springboard that invited a journey of unparalleled uncertainty and adventure. For those of you who may be interested, the lady on the front cover of my book is my wife Susanna, a couple of years after we were married. You should know that although it took me 4 months to write the book, she needed 6 months to decide what photograph of her I could use on the front cover. The book contains all of the ingredients of an engrossing read. Calamitous misfortune, despair and triumph, not to mention corporate challenge, and of course a generous sprinkling of racy Asian adventures throughout. Now, I've divided my talk this evening into 3 parts. Part A, why I wrote the book. Part B, the storyline. And Part C, what I've learned from my experiences. So, firstly, let's deal with Part A, why I wrote it. The principal reason for putting pen to paper was because I had this urge to chronicle events in the mid-1970s, events that lasted 3 years, about 1,000 days, and which completely turned my world upside down. But why take so long to get round to it, you might ask? I'll tell you. For 40 years, I've shared my story with only a handful of friends and acquaintances outside of my immediate family. The reason for this is simple. I've never felt comfortable being on the receiving end of pity. The idea that I might be deserving of a helping hand because of the misfortune that befell me has always irritated me. But now I've retired, I have little concern with what others may think. And if they can be entertained or gain inspiration from my story of trauma and adventure, then I'm grateful for having contributed something exciting into their lives. But I had a second reason for writing it. My time in the sanatorium and subsequent loss of my job triggered a chain of outcomes that resulted in my taking up an appointment in Singapore. It was here where I was introduced to the lady who was to become my wife. We have 4 children. This meant, of course, that Chinese blood would be introduced into the Cain DNA, and I felt I owed it to future generations to document how this happened. I now want to move on to Part B, the storyline. This falls into 2 episodes. Episode 1, the calamity that befell me in mid-1975. And episode 2, how it triggered a future into Asia. Episode 1, the calamity. Pick up this book and you'll read about a guy in the mid-70s who had a promising international career at the cutting edge of technology. Someone in his late 20s who had the magic opportunity of business travel in Europe and the Middle East. My job was to sell membrane-type water desalination systems, principally to the Arab countries that had recently quadrupled the price of oil to their customers in the West. But that all came to an abrupt end after one exhausting business trip to Iran and the Gulf states. When I returned coughing blood, and my immune system shot and barely functioning. I had contracted TB, and I was admitted to a sanatorium within days of my return. How had I contracted TB? I found out later. All it took was an instance of inhaling air in an enclosed air-conditioned environment in the presence of a local individual who was already infected. My whole world then turned through 360 degrees. The next 6 months of isolation was a merry-go-round of ostracism, fear, denial, self-doubt, but more particularly an interminable search for meaning and purpose. I learned that I stood a better chance of winning the football pools in England than I did in contracting TB. Let me set the scene to you, for you. What do you say to someone who has TB? How do you deliver encouragement to someone afflicted when present generations still can remember the disease as a death sentence? And probably most scary of all, can a TB survivor ever really be considered truly recovered? This was the world that I had entered. It was a world punctuated with fear and apprehension, a world that had shrunk to 4 walls in a private hospital room, about 6 meters of first floor balcony, and a 20-meter return walk to the closest bathroom and toilet. Don't forget, there were no ensuite toilet facilities in the Edwardian era sanatorium that had become my home. I spent almost 6 months in that sanatorium, fighting to preserve my sanity while undergoing an extensive treatment regime of multiple injections of antibiotics administered in parallel with x-rays and sputum culture tests. My backside became a nurse's pincushion, and I was convinced I glowed in the dark from all of the x-rays. Add to that, no visitors, nor use of the common hospital telephone. There were no mobile phones then. For the first 6 weeks, for fear of spreading the infection, and you get the picture. But as humans, we adapt. We adapt to all kinds of circumstances, as we have to in order to survive. And I'll leave you to read about all of the challenges and adventures that I and 2 other TB inmates got up to in our supposed imprisoned world. As time passed and my health slowly recovered, fear of my illness was being replaced by a fear of returning to a world that had passed me by and left me behind. Sure enough, when I emerged into society once more, it was evident that the world had survived quite nicely in my absence. My employer was unwilling to reinstate me in my former role. I was considered a business risk, and although still employed, was relieved of any actual responsibility. My self-esteem took a big knock. I mused over my circumstances. I had no real job, few real friends, and there was pity etched into every face I turned to. Plumbing the depths of despair, similar to what I'd felt on that first day entering that sanatorium, I impatiently waited for destiny to play a role. Incredibly, it did. Quite out of the blue. After 6 months of treading water with my employer, while exploring other job opportunities, I accepted a position with a competitive organization, the chairman of which saw my ability to triumph over my illness and incarceration as a strength. The type of fortitude, as I was to learn later, that matched what he saw were excellent qualities for a regional manager of a business in Singapore. This leads me very conveniently to episode 2, a future in Asia. Now, I should be more accurate. Asia's a big place. My area of responsibility was Southeast Asia, namely the countries of Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. In early 1977, I flew out to Singapore to take up my new job, leaving my girlfriend, my drinking partners, and my beautiful sports car in my wake. I sensed in my bones that this was the start of an adventure for which maybe I had been primed. Could a future on the other side of the world have been preordained? Was this the answer to the search for meaning and purpose that had plagued me while laying on a sanatorium bed 18 months earlier? I decided, yes it was. I decided that I would put all my chips on the table and either sink or swim in this position. As a consequence, I refused to formulate a plan B. I was impatient to make Singapore my new home. As a freewheeling bachelor with a good measure of corporate breeding, I was excited. I'm not sure I can do justice to adequately illustrate my Singapore adventures here this evening. I simply have to encourage you to read my book for the second time. What I do recall, however, seemingly clearer and clearer as the years have passed, is that I've developed a real affection for all things Asian. Its people, its food, its geography, its work ethic, and most of all the demure charm, dress code, and attractive femininity of the gentler race in Asia. How could I not envisage Asia in all its manifestations not being part of the rest of my life? Okay, so let's move to part C. What have I learned? I guess if I had to summarize the subliminal messages contained in the book in one sentence, it would go something like this. If you can face down adversity with courage and optimism, and embody a commitment to survive against the odds, then there's a good chance of you being able to open doors to an exciting destiny that was written before you were born. The adversity that stalked me 40 years ago threatened my entire future. I was tested to the extreme, but I survived and have learned much. Some of you here this evening might possibly draw comfort from what I've learned. Perhaps to think about the problems and stresses in your own lives with a little more clarity and reason than what I suspect most people are comfortable with. Now, I hasten to add that this has nothing to do with evangelical teachings or a new search for Jesus. There are others that are much better at doing that than I am. Let me return to the subject of adversity, something that we all instinctively attempt to avoid. And yet, ironically, as I've learned, adversity draws out strengths and qualities that would have remained dormant in its absence. So specifically, what have I learned? 1, I've learned that I was capable of more than I gave myself credit for. 2, I've learned that few problems are truly insurmountable. And 3, I've learned what was really important and to set priorities accordingly. Now, I open my talk today about how 40 years ago I plumbed the depths of despair and defeat. I confronted adversity big time. Adversity was my constant companion. During those 6 months of isolation and the following numerous months of putting my life back together, I had simply no explanation as to why such misfortune had arrived on my doorstep. But I refused to be a casualty of happenstance and became obsessed with the search for meaning and purpose. In time, my quest was answered. Destiny had plans for me that I couldn't possibly have imagined in my wildest dreams. Exciting career opportunities were suddenly within reach, and the love of my life emerged from the Orient. You know, a common phrase that you hear quite often these days is that we make our own destiny. I'd like to rephrase that saying. We deserve the right to live out our destinies. And our destinies are largely determined by the manner in which we confront difficulties and develop a sense of self-belief. However, such confidence or self-belief will not, I repeat, not materialize in an arena where skills and fortitude remain untested. The risk of failure or of losing one's way must always be present. Let me put this another way. You have to have a track record of survival against the odds in order to feel confident in being able to successfully live the life that's been handed to you. Thank you.